We have breaking news now. There's been an arrest in a huge Orange County cold case.
A Newport Beach girl was kidnapped and murdered back in the 1970s, and now the man accused of killing her is in custody.
This is a really bittersweet moment for me, quite frankly, as a district attorney. It's bittersweet to me because she was 11 years old when she was killed, and I was 12 years old when she was killed.
LindaOKeefe never made it home. It was a summer afternoon in Newport Beach, California, the kind that smelled like sunscreen and salt water, the kind where nothing bad was supposed to happen. An 11-year-old girl was walking a familiar route she had taken dozens of times before. And then, without warning, without a struggle anyone could see, without a single person knowing it was happening, she was gone. One moment she existed in the world. The next, she didn't. What investigators were left with was almost nothing. A color, a vehicle, a man whose face no one could fully describe. For decades, that thread, thin as it was all that stood between a little girl and the justice she deserved. Generations of detectives came and went. Technology changed, the world changed, and still the answer refused to come. Because the man they were looking for had made sure of that. He changed his name. He crossed state lines. He built an ordinary life in a quiet subdivision and let 46 years pass while Linda's case gathered dust in a filing cabinet and her photo stayed on a wall inside a police station that refused to forget her. How do you catch a killer who did all of that and nearly got away with it completely? That is exactly what this video is going to break down. Before we go any further, we need to be straightforward with you. This case involves the violent death of a child. The details are difficult, and we are not going to shy away from them, because LindaOKeefe deserves to have her full story told accurately and completely. If you need a moment before we continue, take it. If this is your first time on this channel, hit subscribe before we go any further. What you are about to watch is one of the most methodical cold case investigations ever conducted by an American police department, broken down step by step, decision by decision, from 1973 all the way to a front door in Colorado in 2019. Now, let's go back to Newport Beach. Corona del Mar, California, in the summer of 1973, was the kind of place where kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on, and parents never thought twice about it. It was quiet, coastal, and safe, or at least that was what everyone believed. LindaOKeefe was 11 years old and the middle child in a family of 5. She grew up in a small house on Orchid Avenue, a street she knew the way kids know the places they belong to. Her father, Richard, was a machinist, steady and hard-working, and the two of them shared a closeness that her older sister Cindy would describe years later with the kind of warmth that only comes from memory. Her mother, Barbara, was an artist and a gifted seamstress who made most of the family's clothes by hand, including the dresses the girls wore to school. Linda was shy, blue eyes, long brown hair, a spray of freckles across her nose. She was a Girl Scout and a nature lover who, on family camping trips to the Redwoods, would crouch down beside a creek and sit so still that little newts and snakes would wander right up to her. Cindy Borgeson, her older sister, says Linda saw the beauty in the world and always seemed to see the good in people too. She loved Billie Holiday. She read every Nancy Drew mystery she could find. She played piano, made crafts, painted, and spent as many afternoons as she could at the California beach. Her mother said Linda had a real gift for expressing herself through drawing, that she was incredibly talented. She was, by every account, a gentle kid living an ordinary life in a town where nothing bad was supposed to happen. Both of her parents, Richard and Barbara O'Keefe, will die without ever knowing who killed her. Barbara in 2005, Richard in 2008. They will never hear the name that investigators are still decades away from finding. On the morning of July 7, 1973, a local architect named Ron Yo is cycling a nature trail through the Back Bay area of Newport Beach with his young son. He stops at a spot along the trail to show the boy where frogs can be found in the cattails near the water. Instead, he finds LindaOKeefe. She's in a ditch just off the trail. She's still wearing the dress her mother Barbara sewed for her, light blue flowers, dark blue trim. She's still carrying the homemade book bag she took to school the morning before. Ron Yo calls the police immediately. The search that ran through the night is over. What begins now is something different entirely. The Orange County coroner determines that Linda was strangled to death and had been sexually assaulted. Investigators make an immediate decision about that second finding. It will not be released to the public. No press report will carry it. It will stay sealed inside the case file for decades, held back deliberately as investigative leverage, a detail that only the real killer would be able to confirm without being told. Working the scene that morning is a criminalist named Jim White. He collects biological evidence from Linda's body and her clothing, swabs it carefully, and preserves it. In 1973, DNA profiling does not exist in criminal investigations. There is no national database, no concept of genetic identification, no framework for what this evidence could one day mean. Jim White does not know any of that. He preserves the evidence because that is what the job requires. That decision, one man, one morning, following professional instinct, becomes the single most consequential act in a 46-year investigation. The evidence is stored at the Orange County Crime Lab, on a shelf, where it will wait longer than most people's entire careers. Newport Beach. PD moves aggressively into the investigation. Detectives canvass the area, pull California vehicle registration records looking for turquoise vans, and interview men matching the physical description witnesses provided. Jandy Pearl and her mother are later placed under hypnosis, and the details they provide, white male, curly hair, tan skin, allow investigators to produce a composite sketch of the man in the van. Hundreds of leads are pursued across the weeks and months that follow. None of them produce a name strong enough to move the case forward. Within days of Linda's body being found, a young man named Peter Wooten walks into Newport Beach PD and confesses to kidnapping and killing her. Wooten had just graduated from the same high school class as Cindy Borgeson. Detectives bring Cindy in and hand her a yearbook. She finds his photo and remembers thinking he was odd enough that it might be possible. Wooten is held for 2 days. Detectives question him on details only the real killer would know. He cannot answer a single one correctly. Jandy Pearl, who watched Linda standing beside that open passenger door, is shown his photo. Her answer is immediate. That was not the man she saw. Police confirm the confession is exactly what it looks like. A young man chasing notoriety. Wooten is released. The day he walks out is the same day LindaOKeefe is buried, and the man who actually killed her is already gone. While Newport Beach investigators were chasing leads that went nowhere, the man who killed LindaOKeefe was already building a life somewhere else. To understand how he stayed hidden for 46 years, you have to understand who he was long before July 6, 1973. James Albert Layton, Jr. was born on July 28, 1946 in Chicago, Illinois. He was the middle child in his family. His parole officers would later describe him as someone who struggled to form any meaningful relationship with his parents, with peers, with employers. Nobody who knew him well. That would become one of his most useful qualities. His family moved to California in 1955. 4 years later, at 13 years old, he was arrested on a burglary charge in Anaheim and sentenced to juvenile detention. He was arrested twice more before dropping out of school in 1963, having completed only 11th grade. He was not yet 17. By the mid-1960s, his criminal record stretched across multiple states. In 1966, he came to Denver, Colorado, where he was accused of stealing from the gas station along Colorado Boulevard, where he worked. In 1967, he escaped from a work camp where he had been sent as part of his sentence. He was arrested again in Colorado in 1969 and sent to prison. He was released on parole on July 14, 1971, exactly 2 years before he would kill LindaOKeefe. At the time of the murder, James Layton was on active parole from the Colorado Department of Corrections. He was living in Orange County, California, working in construction. He had no deep ties to the Newport Beach community, no neighbors who knew him well, no colleagues who could place him anywhere specific. He was, for all practical purposes, invisible. After July 6, 1973, he moved fast. He fled to Florida. In September 1973, just 2 months after killing Linda, he was arrested in Florida on a separate matter. His name and fingerprints went on record there. He was arrested again in Denver in 1974 on a parole violation, returned to prison, and placed back on parole in 1975. His Colorado sentence officially ended in 1977. At some point during his time in Florida, a criminal incident there prompted a calculated decision. He legally changed his name from James Albert Layton Jr. to James Allen Neal. The man Newport Beach investigators had been searching for in California, records simply ceased to exist on paper. Neal eventually settled in Monument, Colorado, in a quiet subdivision, living with his daughter. He registered to vote there on October 30th, 2016. By 2019, he was 72 years old, a married father and grandfather living an ordinary life in a quiet town. Now consider this carefully. At the time of Linda's murder, Layton's parole file was open in Colorado. His criminal history dated back to age 13. Newport Beach PD was searching California records for a man matching a physical description with no name and no plate. The parole file existed. The criminal history existed. The interstate system to connect them did not. Then, in September 1973, 2 months after the murder, he was arrested in Florida. His fingerprints were taken. His name was recorded. Here is the question worth asking, and we are going to leave it with you. If interstate law enforcement records had been better integrated in 1973, could the name James Layton have crossed a detective's desk in Newport Beach within months of Linda's murder rather than 46 years later? Drop your answer in the comments, because that question has never been officially answered. Months passed, then years, then decades. Newport Beach PD hung LindaOKeefe's photo in the detective division alongside other unsolved cases. No policy required it, no regulation mandated it. It was simply there, a small girl with blue eyes and a quiet smile, looking out at every officer who walked through that room. Investigators who had worked the original case grew older and retired. New officers joined the department, officers who had not yet been born on July 6, 1973, and they walked past that photo too. It was the department's way of saying, without words, that this was not finished. In the late 1990s, Newport Beach PD sent Jim White's preserved biological evidence to the lab. A suspect DNA profile was built from material that had been sitting at the Orange County Crime Lab for more than 2 decades. In 2001, that profile was uploaded to CODIS, the FBI's National Criminal DNA Database, which holds the profiles of individuals arrested for qualifying offenses. There was no match. Neal had never been arrested for a crime that required his DNA to be entered into the federal system. The case stayed cold. Barbara O'Keefe died in 2005. Richard O'Keefe died in 2008. Neither of them ever heard the name James Allen Neal. They spent whatever years they had left carrying a question that already had an answer. They just never got to know it. That is the real cost of 46 years without a resolution. Not just justice delayed, 2 parents who died waiting. And while that photo stayed on the wall, Neal was not idle. Between 1995 and 2004, he was accused of committing lewd acts against 2 child victims in Riverside County, California, 5 counts across 2 separate girls. Those cases would not be connected to Linda's murder for another 15 years. Retired Newport Beach officer Stan Bressler, who worked Linda's original crime scene in 1973, would later say her death changed the community permanently. It made parents think twice before letting their children walk out the front door alone. By 2017, a Newport Beach PD detective named Sergeant Court Depweg had taken ownership of Linda's case and decided that the old approach was finished. The leads had dried up long ago. The CODIS upload had produced nothing. What remained was the DNA itself, and the question of what modern science could now do with it. In October 2017, Depweg engaged Parabon NanoLabs, a Virginia-based forensic DNA company, and commissioned what is known as a DNA snapshot. The process takes biological material from a crime scene and uses it to predict the suspect's physical characteristics: skin color, eye color, hair color, facial structure, and ancestry. From Jim White's 1973 evidence, Parabon produced two composite images: what the man in the turquoise van likely looked like at 25 years old in 1973, and what he might look like 45 years later. For the first time in the history of the case, Newport Beach PD had a face built not from a witness description, but from the killer's own DNA. Then, in April 2018, something happened that sharpened everything. Joseph James D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer, a former police officer who had terrorized California for decades, was arrested after investigators used genetic genealogy and public DNA databases to identify him. Depweg recognized immediately that the same technique was the path forward for Linda's case. The Golden State Killer arrest also reached Linda's former classmates. Brian Weaver, who had been one of the 11-year-olds riding his bike through Corona del Mar looking for a turquoise van in 1973, saw the news and posted on Facebook asking if anyone remembered Linda. He and classmates Terry Briscoe Corwin, Lisa Christopher, and Jeff Thurner formed a group called Justice for LindaOKeefe and walked into Newport Beach PD asking to reopen the case. They had no idea that Depweg's team was already 2 months away from the most ambitious public cold case campaign the department had ever attempted. Depweg brought the plan to Jennifer Manzella, the department's public spokesperson. His instruction was direct: put Linda's face on every phone, every tablet, and every laptop in the country. Manzella's answer was immediate: Twitter. Depweg agreed, and for a reason that went beyond public outreach. Once the campaign became a documented public event of record, his team would have the legal foundation to request search warrants on Neal's electronic devices, warrants a judge would be unlikely to approve for a 1973 case with no digital history. The campaign was simultaneously a public appeal and a legal strategy. On July 6, 2018, exactly 45 years after LindaOKeefe left home on Orchid Avenue for the last time, the Newport Beach Police Department suspended all regular Twitter content and did something no American police department had ever done before. They spent the entire day posting as Linda. 68 tweets, written in her first-person voice, narrating her last day from the moment she walked out her front door to the morning Ron Yo found her in the Back Bay. Jennifer Manzella wrote every single one of them personally, working from 45-year-old case files, boxed interview notes, original police reports, and a detailed interview she conducted with Cindy Borgeson. The first tweet read, "Hi, I'm LindaOKeefe, or LindaOKeefe if I'm in trouble with my mom." The hashtag was LindasStory. The campaign reached 7 million people. Coverage spread to Australia, France, South America, and every corner of the United States. Tips came in from around the world. Linda's former classmates, Brian Weaver, Terry Briscoe Corwin, Lisa Christopher, Jeff Thurner, watched together as the final tweets dropped, revealing the Parabon NanoLabs DNA composite for the first time, what the killer likely looked like at 25 years old in 1973, and what he might look like today. They had been waiting 45 years to see a face. The campaign also quietly delivered what Depweg needed legally. It was now a documented public event of record, which gave his team the foundation to request search warrants for Neal's electronic devices to determine whether he had been following coverage of his own crime. Manzella said it simply, "It is easy to lose a connection to a person over time in a cold case. By giving Linda a voice, they made her story something people felt rather than just read." Before we get into exactly how that DNA led investigators to a name and a front door in Colorado, if this is the level of detail you want on every cold case this channel covers, subscribe right now. What comes next is the most precise forensic identification process ever used to crack a case this cold. You do not want to miss it. The LindasStory campaign had done its job publicly. Now, the real work moved somewhere quieter. The suspect's DNA profile, the one built from Jim White's 1973 evidence and stored at the Orange County Crime Lab for decades, was submitted to Family Tree DNA, a public genealogy database where millions of Americans have voluntarily uploaded their own DNA to trace ancestry, find distant relatives, and fill in gaps in their family histories. They uploaded it to find grandparents. They uploaded it to find cousins they never knew existed. None of them knew that one day their decision to submit a sample would help identify a killer. The process that followed does not work like a standard criminal database search. It does not need an exact match to the suspect. It looks for partial matches, shared segments of DNA between the unknown suspect profile and people already in the database who may be blood relatives. Those partial matches become the starting points for building family trees. CeCe Moore, chief genetic genealogist at Parabon NanoLabs, led this work. Moore and her team traced those partial matches outward, forward through generations, sideways through branches, cross-referencing age, geography, and physical description at every turn, until the tree narrowed to a single plausible candidate. In January 2019, the results came back. The family tree pointed to James Allen Neal, 72 years old, living in Monument, Colorado, a quiet subdivision where he had been registered to vote since October 2016, living with his daughter, building the kind of ordinary life that gives no outward sign of what came before it. Investigators did not move on him immediately. They placed him under surveillance and used traditional detective techniques to collect a DNA sample Neal left behind in the course of his daily routine, without his knowledge. That sample went to the lab. The comparison was run against the biological evidence Jim White had preserved in 1973. The result came back as a 100% match. Single source, male, James Allen Neal. Sergeant Court Depweg and Detective Mike Fletcher traveled to Colorado and sat down with Neal for a 3-hour interrogation. Neal denied everything. He said he did not remember LindaOKeefe. When investigators showed him her photo, he said she looked almost like one of his own kids in an old picture. When they told him the DNA from the 1973 crime scene was a 100% match to him, single source, no ambiguity, Neal's response was, "I can't explain that." Depweg pressed him. "So you were telling me your DNA just miraculously ended up on her?" Neal said, "It must be miraculous because it wasn't me." He sat through 3 hours without breaking. He would not confess. At the end of the interrogation, Depweg looked at him and said, "You did do it, Jim." Neal was arrested regardless. The significance of what CeCe Moore's team accomplished here is difficult to overstate. Since April 2018 alone, genetic genealogy had helped identify more than 36 suspects in cold cases across the country. Moore's method, combining DNA phenotyping to build a physical profile with genealogical family tree construction to build a name, had become the most effective cold case identification tool available to law enforcement anywhere in the United States. The O'Keefe case stands as one of Parabon's most consequential applications of the technique. It is also, at its foundation, a demonstration of what one man's decision in 1973 made possible. Without Jim White, without those 2 swabs in a screw cap vial on a shelf at the Orange County Crime Lab, without a criminalist who preserved evidence for a science that did not yet exist, none of this happens. Not the family tree, not the surveillance, not the 100% match, not the arrest, none of it. At 6:29 in the morning on Tuesday, February 19, 2019, Newport Beach detectives arrested James Allen Neal at his home in Colorado Springs. He was 72 years old. He did not resist. At his Colorado court appearance shortly after, Neal was led into the room and nodded quietly at his relatives sitting in the gallery. Some of them were crying. The following day, February 20th, 2019, Newport Beach Police Chief John Lewis and Orange County District Attorney Todd Spitzer held a joint press conference at the Orange County DA's headquarters in Santa Ana. Spitzer, born November 26, 1960, which made him 12 years old in the summer of 1973, nearly the same age as Linda, stood at the podium and announced the charges: murder with special circumstances of kidnapping and committing lewd and lascivious acts on a child under 14. If convicted, Neal faced up to 82 years to life in prison. Spitzer confirmed that the death penalty was not on the table. The murder occurred during a period when California's death penalty statute was deemed unlawful. On March 11, 2019, Neal was booked into custody by Newport Beach PD and transferred to the Theo Lacey facility in Orange, California. 2 days later, 5 additional felony counts were filed against him: lewd and lascivious acts on 2 child victims in Riverside County between 1995 and 2004. On March 29, 2019, Neal entered a plea of not guilty to every charge. Senior Deputy DA Eric Scarborough was assigned to prosecute the case. His strategy was to use the Riverside County offenses to establish Neal's pattern of behavior toward children, a critical component for securing a special circumstances murder conviction. Spitzer added publicly that his office believed there may be additional victims beyond those already charged. In the back of the room at the press conference stood Stan Bressler, 79 years old, retired, one of the original patrol officers who worked Linda's crime scene in 1973. When asked how he felt about the arrest, he gave a single fist pump and said, "We got him." When the arrest was announced, Cindy Borgeson spoke to ABC News within hours. She said she never really believed they would actually find the person responsible. After all this time, she said, having a face and a name brings additional closure. But closure is a complicated word for a family that lost this much. Their mother, Barbara, carried the guilt of that phone call for the rest of her life. The afternoon she told Linda she was too busy to pick her up. The instruction to walk home. Barbara died in 2005 without ever knowing who made that walk Linda's last one. Richard O'Keefe died in 2008. The man who killed their daughter outlived them both. Cindy said that because of her faith, she had been able to forgive Neal before she ever knew his name. She could not carry that pain in her heart, she said, but she also shared something that no arrest and no press conference could resolve. For 46 years, the O'Keefe family had lived with a question that no investigator had ever been able to answer. What happened in the hours between when Linda was taken and when Ron Yo found her the following morning? The arrest gave them a name. Neal's death before trial meant the courtroom answer they deserved would never come. On May 25, 2020, James Allen Neal was transferred from the Theo Lacey facility in Orange to an area hospital due to an undisclosed illness. Newport Beach PD confirmed he was not showing symptoms of COVID-19. 2 days later, on May 27, 2020, at approximately 5:15 in the morning, James Allen Neal was pronounced dead. He was 73 years old. There was no trial, no verdict, no sentencing, no conviction on any record anywhere. DA Todd Spitzer issued a statement. The pursuit of justice is never ending, and the death of James Neal prior to putting him on trial for Linda's rape and murder robs the O'Keefe family of the justice they so deserve and deprives the law enforcement officers of the satisfaction that they finally got their culprit. Chief John Lewis said it was the department's intention to see Neal stand trial and answer for what he did. Through the tireless efforts of generations of investigators, he said, they hoped to bring a measure of closure to Linda's family, friends, and loved ones. Senior Deputy DA Eric Scarborough had spent months constructing a prosecution built to last in a courtroom. There was no courtroom. The O'Keefe family had no verdict to sit and hear read aloud, and the question of whether James Allen Neal had harmed other victims beyond those already charged remains, to this day, officially unanswered. 3 things this case teaches that no other cold case breakdown should leave out. The first is about Jim White. In 1973, a criminalist collected and preserved biological evidence from a crime scene without any knowledge of what DNA technology would one day be capable of. 2 swabs in a screw cap vial, stored on a shelf at the Orange County Crime Lab for 46 years. That evidence became the sole forensic foundation of the entire case. The DNA snapshot, the genealogy upload, the surveillance sample comparison, the 100% match, the arrest. Every single piece of it traces back to one man following professional instinct on a July morning in 1973. If you have a loved one whose case has gone cold, there is one question worth asking the investigating agency directly. Has the biological evidence been retested with modern DNA technology? That question alone is the difference between a case staying cold and a killer being identified. The second is about what the LindasStory campaign actually was. Newport Beach PD had no new investigative leads when it launched. What they had was a strategy, a public outreach campaign that was simultaneously a legal instrument, 7 million impressions, international coverage across 4 continents, and a documented public event that gave Sergeant Depweg's team the legal foundation to request search warrants on Neal's electronic devices. It is one of the most effective dual-purpose investigative moves in the history of American cold case policing, and it worked because someone thought beyond the press release. The third is the question this case has never officially answered, and we are leaving it with you. Between 1995 and 2004, Neal was accused of committing 5 lewd acts against 2 child victims in Riverside County. Those cases moved through the California criminal system with no cross-reference made to the unsolved Newport Beach murder. And in September 1973, 2 months after killing Linda, Neal was arrested in Florida under his original name. His fingerprints were taken. His name was on record. If cross-county child assault databases had been integrated in California in the 1990s, or if interstate parole coordination had been tighter in 1973, how many years earlier could James Allen Neal have been identified? Leave your answer below. LindaOKeefe left home on Orchid Avenue on the morning of July 6, 1973. She was 11 years old. She was wearing a dress her mother made for her, light blue flowers, dark blue trim, white ankle socks, dark blue shoes. She never came home. The man who killed her lived freely for 46 years. He changed his name, crossed state lines, built a family, became a grandfather, and died in a hospital bed in custody before a single juror ever heard the charges read against him in a courtroom. His relatives cried for him in Colorado. The family he destroyed never got to hear a verdict. But here is what this case also produced. Jim White kept 2 swabs. Sergeant Court Depweg kept working when there was nothing left to work with. Detective Mike Fletcher sat across a table from a killer in Colorado and told him to his face that the DNA was a 100% match and that there was no explaining it away. Jennifer Manzella spent hours alone in a room with 45-year-old case files and interview notes and gave a murdered child back her voice for 1 day, 68 tweets, 7 million people, 1 hashtag. CeCe Moore followed a family tree built from the ancestry kits of strangers and arrived at a name in a subdivision in Monument, Colorado. Chief John Lewis stood at a podium in Santa Ana in February 2019 and said that name out loud. And the photo of LindaOKeefe that had hung on the wall of the Newport Beach Police Department's detective division for 46 years, the photo that no policy required, that no rule mandated, that outlasted the careers of officers who were not yet born when it was put up, came down. Not because she was forgotten, because the question was finally answered. If this is the level of detail you want on every cold case this channel covers, the forensics, the investigation, the decisions that made the difference, and the questions the system still has not answered, subscribe now. The next case is already coming. You do not want to start it late.